So today I was reading an interesting article in Arabian Business, the newspaper, and it was talking about how the Kingdom of Qatar had signed an agreement with the NATO country of Turkey to send in 3,000 police officers to help the Kingdom of Qatar manage the upcoming World Cup event. So if you're not familiar with Qatar, it's a little tiny monarchy that's on a peninsula jutting off of Saudi Arabia, right in the Persian Gulf, so in the Middle East. And the Kingdom of Qatar, it's not that big. So there's about 3 million, give or take, people in the country right now. But out of those 3 million, only about 300,000 to 400,000 are actually of Qatari descent. So it doesn't have that many nationals. And therefore, its population really can't supply enough police officers to properly manage an event of the magnitude that is the World Cup, as you're going to have just obscene amounts of people from all over the planet coming into this relatively tiny kingdom, right? So Qatar's had pretty good relations with Turkey, so they reach out to President Erdogan, the president of Turkey, and said, hey, can you give us some police officers? We'll pay you to do so. So they agree that, so they're going to send about 3,000 plus police officers. But what makes this interesting is that it could turn out to be just a PR disaster for President Erdogan. So if you haven't been paying attention to Turkey, Erdogan things haven't been going so well for him lately. So over the last 2 decades, he had a pretty iron grip on the country, but it's starting to falter a little bit. So mostly due to his own economic policies. So inflation year on year within Turkey has been over 80%, which is crazy. And a lot of that has to do with Erdogan's own economic policies that he has been demanding. So typically a country's central bank, when inflation is just going through the roof, what to do in order to kind of put the brakes on it is they will raise interest rates, right? So interest rates makes borrowing money more expensive. And when money becomes more expensive to borrow, that typically lowers inflation rates as it cools down the economy, slows things down a bit. But Erdogan has it in his head, which is no economist in the world that I know of or have read agrees with this, that eventually every time inflation goes up, if you decide instead of the traditional measure to raise interest rates, if you do the opposite and lower interest rates, that in the interim, the short term, inflation will keep the rise, but eventually inflation will just get tired of rising. Eventually it'll just sputter out and then it'll collapse, which it takes a lot of chutzpah to have that theory, in my opinion, and gall, but so far it hasn't been panning out. Any central banker in Turkey that's disagreed with Erdogan has gotten sacked. They've just gotten the boot and thrown out. So he has a lot of sycophants in the central bank perpetuating this policy that's really causing the lira, the Turkish lira, their currency, to be worthless. And it's hurting the economy for the average Joe in the street of, say, Ankara or Istanbul. So Turks aren't too happy. So for the first time in 20 years, as there's an upcoming election next year, Erdogan could very well be thrown out. And what makes this, the Qatar sending the troops interesting is if you don't hear about this event again, then it's a good thing for Erdogan, as that means it was a non-event and everything went to plan. And if anything, it helps Erdogan. It helps further solidify his grip as a semi-regional political player, which is always his goal, to increase Turkey as a geopolitical power player. But if you hear about it again, it could turn into a PR disaster for Turkey. So a big part of the agreement, and why I say this, is that the Turkish police being sent into Qatar, Qatari officials do not have authorization to control or command said Turkish police. So in theory, the Turkish police, let's say they take a baton and one gets a little feisty and goes crack some World Cup tourist skull right open. Well, this could be just a worldwide PR nightmare for Turkey, which could further cause Erdogan's chances of re-election to just go down into the toilet and implode. So we'll have to see. If you don't hear about this again, then it was a success for Erdogan. He further strengthened his geopolitical reach in the region. But if you hear about the Turkish police just running rampant and really causing damage or causing trouble for tourists in Qatar for the World Cup, then this could really hurt Erdogan even further, on top of all the economic instability within Turkey going into next year's election. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.